that taken care of in an intro when we post. So if you forget about it, don't worry about it. I've got it covered.
Excellent. Thanks, TC. All right, cool. So we are going live right now. The one thing I'm going to do before we do a little countdown here to start the actual episode is to put something in the Longview Guild. Try to put a little post out, and then I think I'm also going to try it. I don't think I'll be able to tweet it here. I'm actually on my wife's laptop in my parents' house, and this microphone was one that I found on the curb on the way here. So
he touched it.
So are you literally broadcasting from your parents' basement?
No, this is my parents' dining room, actually. But can you guys?
Dining room. Okay.
All right, I touched it. Yeah. I touched the mic. So we're throwing this together, but I've got my recording stuff. I'm actually going on vacation here pretty soon down to Florida, and I've got this. This will be the same rig that I'm trying to record the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly from Florida on. So that one will be in a timeshare. So yeah, can't
commitment.
No rest for the wicked, I guess.
Indeed.
Anyway, guys, so 1824, though, I did want to tell you guys a cool story about this before we got going on the episode. Trent from The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, I don't know if either of you guys have ever met Trent Ham.
We just played 1837 with him at HeavyCon and other games as well.
Okay, yes, and I actually knew that, and I guess I should have phrased that question differently. But cool thing, he when I told him, like, hey, I'm going to be doing this episode, he was, like, thrilled. And so what he did is he went and tried to find a copy of 1824 and couldn't find one anywhere. And he ended up talking to Lenny Orgler, like Lenny, the designer.
Lonny.
And Lenny's like, there's no place that sells it, but I think I have an extra copy. If you want, I can ship it over to you. And so Trent ended up getting one sent straight to him from Lenny.
Dude, that's it's Lonny.
Lonny, I'm sorry, Lonny. I apologize. It's Leonhard.
That's how I got my Lonny. 1824 and my 1880. Chad and I were talking to Lenny. See what you made me do, Lonny, and he goes, you know what? I can build you a 24 and an 1880 just for my parts here. So like I got 1824 and 1880 for like $90 US total.
Yeah. That's what Trent said. He's like sending it to him for cost. So I mean, those guys are just spreading the love. What's crazy to me is like I just looked up, the game. Like they've been designing games for a long time together.
They have individually and together, and now individually again.
So is it kind of like is it like a band group here? Is this like Spinal Tap where they're like, we shan't work together again, and then like a few years down the road, or a few weeks down the road, a few gigs later, they're like, we're back together.
Those creative types, man.
Yeah. Well, it's what's really interesting to me is that like we see in Russian Railroads was the both of them, right? And then most recently, First Class was only Lonny. Got it this time. Nailed it. Crushed it. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, both of which I'm really, really big fan of. And I think at one point you'll probably see Russian Railroad sooner rather than later getting its own Longview. So anyway, what I've done here, guys, I've just shared the link on the YouTube, from the YouTube to the Guild. And then I've got a pop-out chat here, which I'm going to be trying to monitor. And then some of the things I say might be inspired by what I read in the comments. I try to give credit, but since I'm a teacher, I'm just used to plagiarism, and every great teacher is just a thief at heart because you don't use any of your own stuff. It's all been done before. So, anyway, it sounds like though both of you guys though have can talk at length about 18XX in general. We'll do a little bit about 18XX. I know that the main focus of this is going to be the 1824, 1837. But I mean, like, when I first talked to you about this, Tony, it was like, hey, what's your favorite 18XX? And Tony's like, here's a list. It just depends on what you're looking for. It's like,
who's your favorite kid? Right? I mean, who's your favorite kid?
There you go. That's a good conclusion.
But yeah, I want to definitely talk about, these 18XX games have a reputation for being mathy, long, looking like prototype games. And I want to talk about that and in spite of that, why they've captured my imaginations and Kyle's as well. And then, yeah, definitely 1824/1837.
Cool.
Those games are siblings, you know. There's lots of similarities, but they have two distinct personalities, though.
Okay, all right. To what degree? Because I guess I talked to Trent about this, and it sounded like, is 1824 more of like a refining of 1837, or it sounds to me like you play either one.
Yeah. So 24, I don't know. I wouldn't call it a refining because they're two different games. You know, like 1837 came out in 1994, and 2005 is when 24 came out. And
11 years.
Lonny just did 37 by himself, and then he teamed up with Helmut for the 1824 version. And I think of 1824 is a great way to play. It's like an 1837 Reader's Digest version, but it's quite good and quite meaty.
Huh. Well, yeah, I'm very interested to hear about that, as well as, you know, how much that might happen within 18X in general. So, is there anything specifically before we do the countdown here that you guys wanted to make sure that I leave time for mentioning and stuff, or are we just gonna let it roll here?
I'm good to let it roll.
Here we go. Thank you guys, by the way, for your patience. Sorry about all the technical crap on my end.
Joe.
Hey Joe, I'm just going to take a fourth seat here and let you, since we have two guests, I won't speak up too much. So if you don't hear from me, don't worry about it. I'll interject if I have something, but I'm going to let you three have the floor, if that's cool.
But TC, you were just talking on our last episode about how, like, Indonesia versus 18XX, and you're like, I think I'm just going to go whole hog.
Well, yeah, but I'm more interested in what Tony and Kyle have to say. I mean,
I am too.
They're our guests, man. I'll pipe in, but yeah, just
good. Pipe in.
I don't want to interrupt too much.
Sounds good. Okay, well, here we go, guys. In 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Long View. I am your host, Joe Sallin, but I'm not alone because I've got a co-host, and his name is
TC Reed. Good to see you again, Joe.
Good to see you too, TC. And we are broadcasting live right now onto YouTube. You might be listening to this on iTunes years into the future, but hello from the past, if that's your case. Anyway.
That long to edit. Holy cow.
Okay. I don't want to create a rant. I'm known for rants, and I'm about to rant before we even introduce our guest. So I'm going to actually introduce our guest here first. Okay. Because we have an extra special episode, one that was specifically requested in the Longview Listeners Guild. And if you're not a part of that, totally join that on Board Game Geek. It's a really great place where you can it gives you a direct line to both TC and myself. Those of you that are figuring out for the first time, Jeff Gamble, who historically handled the Longview, has passed the torch on. Anyway. For our second episode, me and TC are going to talk about 18XX games, a very heavily requested topic. And we are really lucky to have two guys that are pretty well, I would say you guys have a pretty decent resume on 18XX and just podcasting about 18XX in general. Anyway, without further ado, Tony Fryer, who's originally from Heavy Cardboard, now on the Dual Gauge podcast. It's great to have you on.
Hey, thanks, Joe. TC, pleasure to be here.
And also Kyle Nauman. I'm saying that right, correct?
Nauman, yeah.
Nauman, okay. Kyle Nauman. Kyle Nauman is from the Dual Gauge podcast as well. And he is here to also talk about 18XX, which is like one of your loves and passions, right, Kyle?
Yeah, Joe. Thanks for having us on here. And TC, it's a pleasure to be on. So
it's great to have you, man. These are games that have just one of the most enthusiastic and passionate fan bases out there. And I think that a lot of times it's almost like there's like a rabbit hole and they've crawled through to the looking glass, you know, and it's like almost like it's a separate sort of thing that in my opinion, and obviously in yours as well, Tony and Kyle, that this community that's been around for like 40 years now, almost 40 years since the first 18XX game was made, has not really had much of a voice out there in media, in any sort of media. So I think you guys are doing an awesome job there getting the word out about 18xx games. And if you have interest in specifically 18xx games, the Dual Gauge podcast is your it's your main go-to, right? Like, you guys really quickly want to tell us about Dual Gauge and how it got started and what's going on with it?
Well, we started talking in the middle of last year about starting this podcast. We started up at the beginning of this year. It's a monthly podcast, just usually covering a single game. We talk about what we like and don't like about the game, how we feel that beginners can get into the gaming system, and what experienced people can also gain from playing these games, with certain titles. Anything else you want to add, Tony?
No, that's great. And I particularly like some of the focus being on newbies and new entrants into the hobby, because I just love teaching any game, but specifically 18xx games to new people, because they're just fabulous.
Awesome. Yeah, you're very much an evangelist for those. And I can say that from experience of my very close friends on the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, Trent Ham and Andrew Dennison, they played with both of you guys at HeavyCon, and they told me all about it, which I have like a goldfish memory and forgot until you reminded me. But they said that, like, basically, Tony, you're like one of the greatest teachers, because when you teach a game, you're like there kind of evangelizing it, and then you're making sure that you go for a strategy that might be, you're playing with the mechanisms, with the specific qualities of that 18xx game, instead of just pounding them into the dirt.
Yeah, well, I don't pound it into the dirt very often, as it turns out. Kyle's often a hammer. I'm often a nail. But Trent and Andrew are just two really fabulous guys. I'm really honored to have the chance to meet and play with at HeavyCon. That was really cool. But yeah, my major thing is that I want people to play the game themselves and be available to them to ask questions off of while I'm teaching. And I'm not trying to kill them. I'm trying to play the game, and I'm trying to do things and show them things. Sometimes I'll think out loud, etc., in teaching games and stuff like that. I really want people to have a good experience, because my first experience was yeah.
Well, I have a similar experience to you, actually. Before either Trent or Andy had played many 18xx games, I think before Andy had even tried one, I just got totally smoked into the ground, like in a 7-player teaching game of 1830. Oh. And the guy teaching it like won by a lot. And and I had to make that late game decision after I saw the door open of, do I want to be last and do nothing, or do I want to dump my company onto a guy that didn't have the money for the diesel so that I could get second to last place?
Yeah. No.
So I guess I felt like the nail in many cases.
Yes. Yeah, it happens. But you live and learn. You take some lessons. You move on and try to implement new things next time.
That's exactly right. And I think that what 18xx games really offer you is the ability to do an awful lot of adjustment to your own strategy, because you can really pinpoint where what decisions you made that went in the correct direction and what ones weren't, because in these games there isn't randomness to cloud up anything. So and
it's all perfect information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as we're going to talk, there's not really any catch-up mechanisms.
Oh no.
And also, and we'll make this point again as we go on, but the length of time in these games really gives the opportunity for those strategies to blossom and change.
Mm-hmm. And that's right, because depending on the game, you're going to be looking at anywhere from, an average heavier game's length of 2, 3, 4 hours. But these can go on to being like multi-day experiences. I don't think that's not definitely the normal case, but the previous episode of the most recent episode on 18xx on the Longview was about 18OE, which has a book of scenarios, but its biggest scenario literally says in the rule book that it takes 24 hours. And I'm pretty sure that when the guys from my group played it, it took them more than that, because they were figuring it all out. Anyway, usually you're going to be looking at about 6 hours or so. Would you say that's kind of the general more or less 6 hours.
Yeah, I'd probably say 8 to 10 on the OE.
Okay.
Oh, an OE. Yeah, I think, Joe, maybe, are you meaning in general? I think
I meant in general.
Good.
Yeah. I think Tony, yeah. But
if
OE.
If you look at the two games we're going to talk about tonight, 1824 is like, roughly 4 hours, and 1837 is roughly 8 hours. So 6 is even a nice average in those two games.
That's really interesting because they are kind of, like you've said, they were related, but even with them being related, one of them is 8 hours, the other one's 4 hours. That's quite a bit of spread. So yeah. Anyway, you guys are the experts here on 18xx games, and before we go much further, we are talking today about 1824 and 1837 specifically, but that isn't the only thing. I'm not trying to just force you guys to only talk about that. When I invited them onto the podcast, I just know that the community that wants 18xx wants it to be handled in a way I think that leaves doors open, and so I thought that having you guys focus on these two games one game that turned into 2 games because Tony gave me a list of 15 games that
well, it's the same game, only different.
That's right. Yeah. So I just wanted to leave the door open to more podcasts in the future, more episodes about 18xx, because it is one of those genres where even though there's quite a few qualities that each of these games tends to have in common, you've got tons of like, there will be people who love 18xx, consider themselves 18xxers, but there are certain games within that genre that some people won't even touch, and the same people will love a longer or different or just like a stock focus game versus a network building game. Anyway, would you guys like to quickly just give a brief overview of 18xx, maybe why you guys are fans of this genre, and just for new players, because I think that's really, you guys said you're really focused on trying to get new people into 18xx games. Tell us a little bit about, like, what are some of the selling points? What are some of the things, like to make sure that you look for to make sure that you have the ideal experience?
Well, I'll throw out some bullet points here. I mentioned they have a reputation for being ugly, prototype looking artwork, very simple graphics. They're not beautiful. And they have a reputation for being long, maybe even math heavy. People are intimidated by them, and I really want to dispel and explain some of those things. So first of all, they're not ugly. Frankly, I think they have somewhat of an appealing, clear, simple aesthetic.
That's the use. The word clear is always the one that follows. Like, what do you think about the 18xx presentation? Either it's clear or it's negative.
Well, it's form over function, man. The art is not obfuscating the information.
It is the Bauhaus art philosophy. Yes, form over function.
It's like the old generic cans of green beans. It was a black and white label, and it said green beans. You know what's in that. That was it. Also these things are often made in someone's house, right? These are craft productions, handmade one at a time. And that, you don't want to go too crazy on artwork and stuff like that when it's your, kind of your night job, so to speak. And, but that doesn't mean the component quality is poor. There's wooden discs, everything's laminated, boards are mounted, the maps are mounted on standard game boards. I mean, this is not construction paper and tiddlywinks, although I have gotten 18xx games.
I was going to say, I think you might need to specify which ones you're talking about.
But in general, the production values are much higher than they were. A lot of games have even gotten the Eurogame treatment, and by and large, they've been kind of panned by the community for the artwork, some obfuscation. And here's this thing, like if you're playing an 8-hour game and there's 5 of us around the table, I want to look over there 3-4 feet away, and I want to immediately see that you have 1 3 train and 1 2 train on that company, or you have this stock or what have you. So I don't want certificates to look like stock certificates because I can't see what the hell it is over there. I need to make decisions about your position in the game relative to mine. And I don't want to ask you, I don't want to say, hey, what do you have on that charter?
How many shares did you have right now? All right.
G-Tone, why? Nothing. Don't read anything into that. But also, they're not mathy. It's consumer math. It's like Johnny's got $10. His mom sends him to the store. Those generic green beans are 89 cents a can. How many cans can he buy with $10, and how much change does he have, right? Because the only math in here is adding up your route. Yeah. So if you can add 20, 30, 10, and 40, you know what? You came up with, what is that, $100, right?
Absolutely.
That's what your route is. So it's not mathy.
Mm-hmm.
These games have is this depth, decision, opacity, like no other game I've played, really. And that's what's captured my imagination in these things. It's very hard to see the future in these games.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're so player centric and player interactive,
it's very hard to see the future of that specific game, because it's very hard. I see what you're saying, because like what you just said, though, that word opacity is a word that has really been gaining some traction, specifically in some of the heavier game circles. Like, people that play these heavy, long games don't want to feel like they know where they're going to be at 1 hour from now, or, like 10% of the game from now. They want that feeling like that where they're at is on very kind of like tense and unknown territory, like sort of, being a business, starter of taking this railroad company and trying to make it work and see whether or not you have the tools and the know-how to do it.
Yeah, I want to be able to set a course, and then I want to be able to be forced to work at keeping that course straight. Meanwhile, you're doing the same thing for your course, and it's screwing up my course, and I just love that. That's the way.
Yeah, you end up having to really think around what other people are doing and make those things that I talked about on the last episode of Longview. Circumcisions, where you have to think around them. I'm gonna make this work. By the way, TC, I'm gonna make this work. This circumcision.
More power to you. I wish you nothing but the best.
No, like your efforts to circumdecide my game doesn't even have to be mean. Like sometimes people think these games are mean, and some of them certainly are, but by and large, they're not. It's just business. I'm building my trains, I'm building my routes. That's all it is,
Mm-hmm.
That's not, too dissimilar from basic Euro games, getting each other way. But besides the opacity, what these things have? These games have a current in them. And often that's represented by the train rush. That's just pushing the technology and pushing the players. So there's depth and current. So it's, it's some dangerous swimming, and I like that. It's also like this system, right? All these games have the same basic rules, but then they have these MacGuffins, quote unquote, that are just these plot devices that give each game their own unique flavor and spin and everything. So it's amazing. It's like all these different maps for Concordia, for example.
Yeah,
they all have their different spin, but it's the same game. It's not really any different with 18xx. And then my last just bullet point is these games give me what I call time as a gift. Because they are long, and so that these games don't have catch-up mechanisms. They make me work for it and figure out how to change my course in the game, and it gives me the time to see that blossom. Hopefully, unless I screw it up. This is
that's right. No, you go ahead. Go ahead, Tony.
The game's not going to give me an extra 2 gold pieces because I'm last place on the score track. I have to go find those 2 extra gold pieces myself.
Mm-hmm. So, absolutely. Do you have anything? Is that your basics elevator pitch on 18xx?
Essentially, that is. I do think that Americans have short attention spans. That's why movies are 2 hours and sitcoms are 30 minutes. And so I understand it's difficult. Not everybody feels the same way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's maybe why we have, things like legacy games and stuff like that, where you can play for a couple hours, put it away, pick it up next weekend, play again. I feel like I get the whole legacy game in one sitting.
What a perspective. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd never thought about it like that. Your game sort of goes through different eras, I would almost call it, and those are almost abstractly represented by this rush of trains or I guess that just trains in general that can be rushed. Like you said, there's a certain current, like an ebb and flow to being able to predict where the economy and what the the game state, how much is going to change based on what other players do. I mean, all these things, like really interesting things. Oh, also, you said the word MacGuffin, and I'm pretty sure that word, to anybody who's not ever heard the word MacGuffin before, is used in 18xx to refer to a specific 18xx title's differences from the most popular 18xx game, which would be 1830, correct?
Yeah, I think Alfred Hitchcock coined that phrase or something, or he made it famous at least because
he was an 18xx player.
Well, yes, he was, and but that's what he called the different plot devices in his movies were MacGuffins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is used now. It's applied like metaphorically with 18xx games because you're not talking about a whole different system. Like if this is an 18xx game, there are certain base almost requirements that you would expect. And would you like to tell me, either Tony or Kyle, what sort of things in okay, Kyle, you go. What's an 18xx going to have?
Well, it's going to have 4 distinct parts to the game. Initially, it starts out with an initial auction, or a few have the MacGuffin of they just pass around cards and you choose and then buy.
Mm-hmm.
But this auction is a little special normally. It's called a waterfall auction. And so you set out bids, and then once the cheapest private is bought, everybody that has put a bid on the more advanced ones has the option to either bid higher or pass. If you're not in those, you're out of it already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how the game sets the players into different levels, starting positions.
Mm-hmm. So everybody will end up with different little companies.
Different little companies that do a special little thing normally, and they'll get you some money.
So like variable player powers, but you auction them off, sort of.
Yeah.
Then, correct. And in 18xx, your winnings is money. So you're spending your victory points right away.
Does every 18xx have to have money in it? Has there been one so far? I know because there's been a lot of different explorations, but every single one has always been about winning with money. Have there been any that have been like abstractly represented by like victory points for connecting certain routes or anything?
Not that I know.
Okay.
No.
But I've never played Poseidon, so I'm not for sure on that one. That one's the weirdest.
I have played Poseidon. Woohoo! I get to be an expert on something here. No, but Poseidon's all about money. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's all about, you get money for your little discs, which are like shares and track, and it's about money.
Okay. So the next part is there's a stock market rounds. In these rounds, you can buy and sell shares of your own stocks or of other players' stocks. Sells usually hurt the value of the shares, and this can be the difference between winning and losing in a lot of games.
Mm-hmm.
Winning with $1,000 is exactly the same as winning with $8,000. Doesn't matter, you win. So that's the main object of 1830 normally, is winning with pretty much the least amount of cash that you can. Because normally if 1830 goes to the end, you're probably not going to win.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually a coin flip of who wins.
That's interesting, really deep analysis of 1830.
Yeah. So you're trying not to go bankrupt in 1830 a lot, but you're trying to force the others to go bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So this also sets the turn order of the companies and how they operate. This is extremely important for beyond just introduction plays. It sets the order in which the trains come out and which companies will get which trains. Certain companies in certain parts of the board like different types of trains. Like in certain
like I know that when I played 1830, the B&O Railroad is like at the south part of the board, and in the one game that I have of it, the guy that was teaching and showing the game, like he had two trains to start out. So that's the the lowest amount of trains. Right. And as these trains get purchased, the bigger ones will be available. But then also buying a bigger one can like cause all of the earlier ones to go away.
All the other ones to go away.
Oh man,
yeah. And that's called
current, baby.
Yeah. Oh, and rusting is like a kick. It's a kick into the privates. Yeah.
If you're not ready for rusting, it's bad news. That's real bad.
Yeah, but that's something that's always ever present. Like Kyle, you're saying, it's even deeper than just you want to have trains. You want to have specific trains based on what company you are and where you're at.
Yeah, because different parts of the board are better for different trains. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really important in 1837 because it has so many different types of trains. Mm-hmm. And we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
The next step is a company can lay track. Now, track is limited in these games. And advanced track tends to run out extremely quickly. So the sooner in the operating round you get to go, once they're available, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're going to be like jockeying. So you might buy somebody's stock in a stock round and then sell it just to cause their stock price to drop, which might make them go later in turn order. So that way you get the ability to take that advanced track tile. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly. So all of these are tied together. And you might get the train that you want then.
Yep.
Also,
first crack at rusting.
Yeah. And running those little 2 trains again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you can make it happen, man.
The last thing is a station markers. Now, this is a form of, I call area control. They block out competing companies from access past your tokens in most games. This extends to if you can completely token a city with your own companies, is a way to keep everybody out.
Yeah, you're bringing back memories. This is nice.
So basically, the tokens, for the most part, are a way for you to like kind of claim territory, mark your territory.
Pretty much.
Because you always, if I recall right, you always have to run through one of your tokens. Like you can't have a train that doesn't run through a token. It always has to at least include a token somewhere. But that's not the only use for tokens. As you're saying, you can actually, there's spots for tokens in cities, and there are times when you can put those down in a city, and if that closes it off, that means anybody whose token is not in that city can no longer run through it. They can run to the city, right? But they can't run to it through the city.
Yeah, and then add that to the limited tiles, and you got a real fun situation.
Precarious.
Yeah, some games have a reputation for being tighter with the tokens than others, but it's always fun.
Now, another thing, these games are based on historical facts. They're well researched normally, and usually have a really awesome historical reference section in the rulebook based on what they have found out about the game and the area. And I find that really interesting that these guys have gone to that much length to make a game and also research.
Absolutely. So TC, you're kind of coming at this from the wargamer angle, and this is, I believe, another quality that you might appreciate from like war games. Like we were just shooting around about Gettysburg, and there's a few other ones you guys were talking about. I mean, like that rule book usually is twice as long as the rules are because they've got historical footnotes and things.
Yeah, the 1846. I mean, that's the one I have the most experience with. It's interesting because the companies are historic. I did a little bit of looking into it, and that whole Midwest. It was really, really quite fascinating how the research that went into that and how they represented it in the game. I rather enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, the history is a big draw for me too. I'm a big history nut. And I really love reading the designer's notes in the backs of the rules.
Oh yeah, Tony, preach it.
Yeah,
Tony, you just recently tweeted a picture of a train. It was a video. Sorry, a video that you recorded.
Yeah, the UP 844 just ripped past my house this weekend.
And the funny thing is, I shared with Tony then that the UP Union Pacific Railway is a company that actually employs most of the it's the largest employer in the town where I teach, of Boone, Iowa. So
cool.
Yeah, Boone, Iowa, trains, trails, and treasures, and also board games. I don't have any T word that starts to talk about board games. Those two, train games. Train games.
Train games.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, no, the historical part is also like, I think that some people come at it from like I'm interested in the history and the trains angle, and then they get like sucked in by the gameplay, and then others get sucked in by the gameplay first and will eventually develop almost like a taste for the train, for the history, and just the way that it's sort of tied to the development, especially like a lot of these games like 1830, 1846. There's a lot of games that involve the westward expansion. So, I mean, specifically a lot of like, for example, Kyle, you live in around Chicago. I'm gonna I was gonna write here in our live chat your social security number and address in case anybody's wondering. But in the Chicago area, a lot of these train games, specifically 1846, is like the quest to get from the East Coast to connect like a train that runs to Chicago. So, you know, sometimes it's right at your doorstep. Yep.
Yeah, and that's awesome. You know, that it can bring it home to you, to a lot of places in almost every part of the United States now is covered with at least one train game.
Yeah. Oh, and the whole world too. I mean, like 1837 is about like, isn't it India? And then there's now 18 Ireland. 1822 is Railways of Great Britain, right? And that one just won the Golden Elephant at from Heavy Cardboard. All kinds of places. It's 1849.
Isn't 18OE the Orient?
What?
18OE is the Orient, isn't it?
18OE. It's mostly Europe, but it's about connecting to the Orient, which is kind of like No, it's there. It's there. 1849 is about unfortunate group of people that were unfortunate enough to be on the island of Sicily at the time when a volcano exploded. That game is like
I got relatives dying with this.
Exactly, man. That's just Tony's history.
That's where my peeps are from.
So, the history is all around us for sure, and I really think that that's a big draw for a lot of people that are into 18xx games. But I don't think that's really. I think the main draw here, more than anything, is just the amount of impact that any player can have on the entire game system. It's just like every action you take is like that butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world. And on the other side of the world, you know, there's a tsunami or whatever it is that's going on. And that is basically, that's abstractly represented by 4 hours of time passing your game. Now the tsunami comes for you and you're going to be like, oh no, that was a bad idea.
Yeah, you know, these games caused me to go full rabbit hole, man. You know, one of the reasons I walked away, you know, from the Heavy Cardboard was to play more 18xx games. You know, so I dove in hard.
That's a good reason.
I'm still in there hard, man. You know, like I would say, I play every week, and I do play Euro games and everything. Don't get me wrong, and games of all weights, different groups around town and everything. But I'm full rabbit hole. These games have really captured my imagination because of all those things, Joe.
Yeah, it's really, there's a lot of different qualities that people can certainly, you know, like that you're not going to get anywhere else is one of the main things. Like you're not getting these things from, like you mentioned, Euro games. Like there can be a lot of things going on in Euro games, but you're not going to get the sort of player interaction, player determination that you will generally get. I'm not saying there's not a Euro game that kind of cannot approximate it. I'm thinking, you know, maybe a game like Imperial 2030. I know that this is one that's pretty highly regarded by a lot of people who prefer train games in general. And they're like, well, if I'm going to play a, you know, war game or a train game in general, a train game Risk, I'll play Imperial 2030, but they usually prefer just to stick to 18xx games in my experience. So, Tony, when I reached out to you to do an 18xx game, you gave me like just a list. First of all, you gave me like a binary choice, and then a list of a bunch of options. So the first binary choice was, did I want to do more of a stock game or more of a train operation game? And I don't know if that was exact. I'm paraphrasing, but that's a pretty big, that's like the dichotomy of train games. Would you like to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I guess some games are more stock oriented, and I have a little bit of a problem with that characterization because they're all stock oriented. A huge portion of your final scores in your stocks. I think the general meaning, it's more like financiers, right? Like, is the stock market friendly, or is the stock market a tool / weapon? Right? Is it a victory track, or is it a set of weaponry? And I think that's
the thing I've heard is that the stock market, depending on which one you get, you can really mess with that stock market. And that's one of the biggest reasons I want to try 1830, because I hear you can really manipulate that thing pretty harshly.
And then, even on the operational side of things, is this more of an operational game? Well, aren't they all? I guess it's
none of them are obviously going to totally ignore one. But what? Yeah. Right. So you don't like the fact that they're characterized that way, but it's the community itself that's doing the characterization, right?
I suppose, maybe the community at large and others that are finding that as an easy way to categorize the games, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But I think they're all the same. Guts like that, right? The track laying, the operations, and the stock market. To me, it's just sometimes the operations are a little more cutthroat. Like, tokens really matter. If you think you need a token there, then it's already too late to put a token there. If right, 18OE, you put a token there. What do I care? I'll just go around it.
Yeah,
there's
you're able to build.
There's friendly and not friendly.
Mm-hmm. Some games you're able to build a lot more track, and the game it just allows you a lot more sort of workability. Whereas in other games, you have to be thinking 3-4 turns in advance about where you're going to put your track in, and then if somebody sees what you're doing and kind of heads you off at the pass, you're pretty much already in a bad spot, most likely.
Yeah, and it's the same with the stock market. A lot of games, I can sell 4 shares of stock, and the stock market, that's kind of friendly. The 2 games we're going to talk about is like that. But there's 1830 and others where if I sell 4, then the price goes down 4. So I have further control over your score and your position in the operating order.
Mm-hmm. So question here then. Given that you believe that just having this sort of distinction in a way is kind of almost defeats or it ignores a lot of the qualities present in every 18xx game, what would be, I guess I'm going to ask you to defend what is the point of having a stock market aspect of the game if that's not the central focus? If it's one like, for example, I think 1846 is one that was talked about previously on the long view, but it's generally the stock market in that game is not, it's a one-dimensional, so it's only like a single line. You don't have 2-dimensional.
You say that
up
like
and
that's
down.
a bad thing.
Well, I'm saying
because here's the thing: the games are focused on both things, stocks and operations, and a lot of these quote unquote 2D stock tracks are no different. They're just a 1D stock track in wolf's clothing, right? They're just it's the same value increments up as it is down, sideways, etc. So it's really a one-dimensional track. So there's nothing wrong with one-dimensional tracks. Those are perfectly wonderful. And true 2D tracks are also perfectly wonderful. And the games have focus on both things, right? It's just a matter of, is the stock market a tool for me to use to climb back into the game or manipulate turn order and stuff like that? And how much is the map a tool to use for the betterment of my company's operations?
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes an awful lot of sense. I didn't mean to diminish the importance of a stock market because of the one dimension.
Cool.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people think that a 1D stock market is inferior, and I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think it was sold when 1846 was being sold to me by my local guys. They were just like, the stock market's not that big of a deal. It's only one-dimensional. And I didn't really think of it one way or another, but I totally understand. Like the thing is, in 1846, you have it also separated into areas that you can do double jumps and areas you can do triple jumps from. in terms of like how much you can increase. So I mean, like there's more to it even than the one-dimensional going up and down. So what type of things get added then to, like, if there's a game that's mainly about stock? You said, especially when you mentioned 1830, Kyle, you mentioned that like really 1830 is about seeing who's in a bad spot and then finding a way to, by manipulating the stocks and by manipulating that turn order to make sure that they're in a spot where they can't afford a train, that it's like basically about forcing the end of the game when you're ahead. Does that make sense? That's kind of what?
That's exactly how normally you want to end 1830.
Well, then what's I guess the positives and negatives to the track laying element? Because that game you said has a really fleshed out stock element to the game. But what does the board construction? What are some of its maybe? What's the positive and the negative element about that?
Well, the board sort of is almost builds itself at times with 1830 because it's been played so many times and the revenue-rich centers are so few in 1830 that you're going to go straight towards them to make money. Now, in 1830, you only need to pay money to go forward, just to pay a dividend. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as you pay, you go forward, and that'll give you some money. Otherwise, some of the negatives is that because the track is so limited in 1830, you can get blocked out of areas really easily between the tokening and the tiles. One of the special tiles is called a double dit, and it has 2 small cities on them. Now, there's only one of each type of those in the game. And once they're down, they can't be upgraded. So these really control the way the game develops, is the way that these certain spots on the board get placed. And that's how the game will develop.
There's many more spots on the board that are potential places you could put this tile. So, like, right. You said there's only one of each type, and there might be 2 or 3 potential places that could be dropped, and that'll then impact what areas of the board are going to actually be lucrative and what trains and what runs you can do.
Right. So it might not allow your companies to go to New York, or it forces you up through the Detroit area, which is usually blocked because there are single tokens in that area. So that spots get tokened out really fast also. So that's one of the negatives of the board, I feel, because you don't normally get really big routes. Sometimes you will, but it seems like if you do, you've gotten lucky or somebody played wrong.
Okay, so what I'm getting here from listening to what you're saying is that 1830 seems to be a game that's about cutting each other off at the knees and doing that either by the stock market or by the board. But both of them are kind of set up just so that's what you do.
That's what you do, yep.
Now, there's never been a Longview 18xx episode about 1830, though it is the highest rated game of the 18x categories on Board Game Geek. Now, when I approached you guys, I was like, why don't we do an 18xx episode? I threw out a few different options. One of them was 1830. Both of you guys, well, Tony specifically, you were like, let's talk about this a little bit. Let's not go because I can feel the sense of the limitations here, Kyle, because it sounds to me like you guys are looking for rabbit holes, and this is almost more just like a single tunnel in 1830, because it's like almost like a predetermined tunnel that's dug for you, and it's just where in it can you get somebody to suffocate? Which choke point can you get them to really just die? What about 1830 is it that, or I guess not so much what about 1830, but I think we've talked about what qualities 1830 has. How would you compare 1824 and 1837 to the things that you guys are looking for in these 18xx games, and maybe contrast them with 1830, because that might be a frame of reference that many people have?
Yeah, I think like 1837 is everything that 1830 isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it's hard to get 1830 to the table in our groups because of 2 reasons. A lot of people don't like it, and and a lot of people have played it 500 times.
Oh. So 1837 isn't quite like that. You guys have played it quite a bit, right? 1837, 1824, but
yeah. So you want to talk about those two?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can definitely draw out some 1830 lines while we go on, as you suggested.
Was there something that you had specifically in mind before you wanted to move on to actually talking about 1824, 1837? Was there?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Cool. It's time, guys. Let's talk about them.
All right. Well, 37 was made in 1994 by Lonny Orgler, and 1824 was made in 2005 by Lonny Orgler and his partner in crime sometimes, Helmut Ohley. So, and these two games have the same theme. They're set in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And, it's mainly the same companies, mainly the same map, mainly the same everything, but there are some substantially different MacGuffins that create that same space. 1837 is a longer game. It's about 8 hours. It's got a slow, leisurely pace. There's not, tons of risk in the game. There's more stuff in the game. There's this really fantastic story arc, in my opinion. Versus 1824 is a shorter game, maybe 4 hours tops. And it's got a faster pace. It's got a lot more pressure. There's more risk. There's less stuff. There's a shorter story arc. It's kind of like the bathtub version of 1837. It's much,
the Reader's Digest.
It's much smaller. Reader's Digest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that my thought was these are fantastic games, and we could talk about both at the same time and contrast and compare them. And they really show off a couple of things: MacGuffins and how they change the games, and why they illustrate in large part a great reason to why we like these games and why we think they're fun.
Excellent. Yeah.
1837 is available you can buy 1837 right now. Apparently, you cannot get 1824 very easily right now.
No.
I looked today. I looked in the BGG marketplace, and there was one in China for like 300 US.
Ooh, that sounds like it could. Yeah, that's
not sure I'd
painful.
trust that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be a rough way to lose $300 too.
Let's see. I can give a little synopsis of both games, but Kyle, do you have anything you want to say about the two games or whatever?
No, I'll just join in when we get to some stuff here.
Cool. Well, yeah, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is the thematic center of both of these games. They both have a number of mining companies, as well as minor railroad and public railroad companies, and also some national railroad companies that come late game. And initially, the players are running these mining companies. And the mining companies are basically, they're building track, they're running these quote-unquote goods trains for their revenue. And they're getting revenue from the mines and revenue from the cities that they visit with those trains. There's also some small private companies available, but we'll skip over those for the time being. So these mining companies are developing the track on the game. And it's a really important part of the game because that's a lot of the often cities are being added into the network, and sooner or later, the players are going to have enough money built up that they're going to start one of these public railroad companies are going to run what I call people trains. Since the other trains are called good trains.
Okay.
So I figure those are people trains.
Mm-hmm.
And these mining companies are slated to be merged into these public companies during the game, and at some point,
interesting,
forcibly merged in.
So people are going to be riding around in mine carts then.
No,
like Indiana Jones, right?
Indiana Jones, Indy. Yeah, so there's a whole meta game going on around who's starting what company and who's going to have mining companies that fold into those public companies. You have a mining company that's going into a public company that you're not going to be the president of. There's a little game to be played about maybe not leaving good trains and a lot of money on that mining company when it gets forcibly merged in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you're going to get shares in that company as a result. So, you're not out of your investment at all. You got shares of hopefully a good company. And similarly, these national companies come out late in the game. There's 3 national companies in both games. And those minor railroads function the same way as the mine companies do with relationship to the mergers. These minor railroads, that same game to be played, but it's a different game of the ownership of these minor companies that can fold into and will fold into these national companies. Mm-hmm. And so there's games to be played with the future ownership of those national companies, because companies are going to give you ownership in those national companies, but also ending of the game, you can buy certificates in these national companies, even though you're not formed yet. So it's like this really long range forward investing. So you're going to tie up money in the shares you can't sell in order to try to who is getting these. The governments give them some serious cash, your force, and it's really fun to negotiate that pathway of who's gonna own these companies and the different things you can do there.
So when you say minor companies, you mean MINER, as in like for mining, right?
Yeah. Okay. Good clarification.
Because there is
mining and minor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this one adds a lot. Like the mining is a really big part, because most 18xx games that I have played have at least one part of the map that requires like really expensive route construction because you're going through mountains. And there's other like abstractions, that like you could have a river that costs more money. But a lot of times then there'll be some sort of a specific minor, or not minor, but a private company that can then be added to a bigger railroad company to make it so that the mining, you don't have to pay as much to go into those mountains. Is there that sort of thing here? Or it sounds to me like almost like the mining companies form just like this pretty big undercurrent to the game, because you've got goods on the one side, you have your miners and your mining companies, minor companies, and then they eventually roll into passenger trains, which almost makes me think of like Snowdonia, that one game about the train that goes up. It's just like a pleasure train that goes up and down a mountain, but nothing like that here, right?
No, but it is multi-layered. The 1837, for example, those private companies I just briefly mentioned, really what they do is help you lay track in some of those mountainous regions and pay you a revenue, but whatever. They're not all that consequential. But it is multi-layered because the public companies and the national, all these guys can run goods trains later in the game too. So when you're absorbing these minor companies, they might have trains that can serve those mines, or just people trains, or both. Really interesting levels and layers there to get into.
Mm-hmm. So what is the specific board construction like? This is, you said, the antithesis in many ways of 1830. How is it that you feel that you have less of maybe an impetus to find the place to choke off another player as in 1830, because that's apparently what you're trying to do, is just little by little until the airway closes completely. And here in 1837, how would you compare the board and the size of the map and how it goes in a game?
Well, the main difference is I have a lot of fun laying track on 1837, and I can't say that about it early.
You have a lot more choice. I'm sorry, Kyle, go ahead.
So one of the ways that 1837 and 24 do this is the way the good trains run is that they run and collect all of the little cities that they can hit if they want to. So you have a need to go and build all of those and even connect up with other companies that have already built some.
Okay, so it's like you're really dovetailing everything into everything else, and not just like
trying to restrict your areas.
Okay, all right. So it's more of a continually expanding map as opposed to a map in which you're really trying to guillotine your own routes.
Yeah. 37.
Guillotine others out of your routes.
Definitely both of these games have their particular revenue centers, but the map more open, a lot more fun. It's not as restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
Important.
So does it covers like the Austro-Hungarian Empire then? So does this it could have been a pretty big size of like Central and Eastern Europe at one time?
Yeah, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was pretty big. A lot of what is now Croatia, the former Yugoslavia, a lot of that, Hungary, little bits and pieces of other little companies or countries rather.
So what mountains are we talking about there? I'm not a geography. I'm actually embarrassing myself here because I do consider myself pretty decent at geography, but I just don't remember. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I think the ones in Austria are the there's a lot more as you get into Hungary. I mean,
okay.
Yeah. But yeah, there is mountainous terrain on these maps, that's for sure.
All right, so there's like a sort of narrative that comes out here about how mining companies turned into passenger companies, how these railroads sort of expanded to want to encompass these goods supply lines that were already in place. Now, where do you come in? Where does this game put you down, like with the ability to basically start to connect whatever goods you want and kind of make your own sort of snaking good path? I guess I'm just curious as to, where you start from and what is your general idea goal? Like when I come into 1837 or 1824, what sort of mindset change should you go from other 18xx's when you come into here?
Well, I think, you want to start with looking at in that initial auction, companies and private companies are you going to be owning?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it goes into what public companies can you start? You have to think about what miners do you want to try to possess as well, because those play into the national companies. So it's really kind of a dual-pronged approach there. You want to think about your mining / public companies as well as your minor / national companies,
which are not minor,
right? So, yeah. Minor. So you can't just think about one thing. You got to, think about where you want to work within those two categories on the map, and could they even play together? Like Kyle was mentioning earlier, if you own a couple of companies and you can put those companies' tokens in a city and herd other companies that belong to other players, that's how can I play in both of these? That all work that factor into me owning a resulting great public company, resulting great national company. Threats, what are my risks?
All right, thanks. It's great to hear from you, Nail. Now, would the Hammer like to tell us what you're going to do to smoke him into the wood?
I think in 1837, it's important to diversify a lot.
Okay.
It's not a stock trashing game, and neither is 24. No. Obviously have points where it's useful to do it, but in the long run, you're going to gain more by holding on to those stocks. The routes are worth money, a lot of money, as is the jumps in stock value in both of the games, especially in 37, because it has a special hexagonal stock market that allows to move in 6 directions. Not that
really
it moves.
Which one is this? 24 or 37?
This is 37.
Okay, but they took that away in 24.
Right. 24 is almost exactly like 30 without that left-hand corner left down.
Okay.
It's just there's no yellow, brown, or orange.
Yeah, there's not like stock where. Yeah, because sometimes you can want to manipulate the stock market to where you actually want your companies to have terrible stocks that you can own more general certificates, but that's something that is a different layer of 1830 that is not present then in 1824. But aside from that, the stock, they really kind of just made it kind of cut and dry like 1830 stock market wise.
Pretty much. But because of this hexagonal stock market, because the stock market has what are called. So when the stock goes all the way to the bottom, it's on a shelf and it can't go any lower.
Mm-hmm.
When it goes to the right and has to go up because of the shelf ends, when in 37, it goes up like double value of what it normally would.
Mm-hmm.
Like in like 24, it'd go up like 10, but in 37, it'll go up like 16 or 18.
Mm-hmm.
With the normal like going straight up, would only move it up like 9.
So you get some pretty nice jumps.
Pattern.
And is it
right?
Is it kind of like in 1830 where it'll generally lose money if there's shares in the open market, and it'll gain money? I'm sorry, the vertical and vertical up and down movement in a stock market is usually because all of it's owned or some of it's on the open market. Is that the case here?
Yeah, they both have those still.
Okay.
Now, 37
but you've also got these sort of like these diagonal movement.
In 37.
So in 37 has that diagonal movement of when it goes, when it's all sold out, either up and to the right or up and to the left, based on the stock holdings of the president. If he owns less than 50%, it'll go up and to the right.
Mm-hmm.
If he owns more than 50%, it'll go.
Okay. So you're trying to manipulate it so that it does go up and to the right, because you said that jump is significantly higher than what you'd expect.
Significantly higher.
Okay.
Than a straight, yeah.
Straight vertical.
Yep.
Cool. Anything to add to that, Tony?
Yeah, there's one really cool thing about 1837 stock market that subvert the common paradigm of when you pay half revenue, nothing bad can happen to your company's stock value. Because often, if I didn't pay enough money, I'll just spin in place on the stock market value chart. I won't actually move backwards. But in 1837, if you pay a half a dividend, you will actually have a decrease in value.
Ooh.
It's very slight, but it is a decrease. I think it's really neat. The hex market, super cool. It gives a designer six way to move stuff. I mean, you can get some out of that, including a retrograde for paying a half dividend. So that breaks rules that are common in most 18xx games. So I think that's really cool.
How subtle would you say the hexagonal stock market is in 1837, considering that it did not get carried over to 1824?
I think it's pretty subtle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like 6 of one, half dozen the other for me. I think that it has some cool features, but I don't care.
Okay.
OMG.
Ermagerd, hex stocks. But that was pretty new in 1895.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a few things we can talk about to contrast and compare these two games. And the stock market's one, and Kyle did a great job of laying that out. I'm thinking, just for fun, if Kyle's up for it. Kyle, who wins the stock market between these two games, 1824 or 1837?
The stock market? I'd give it.
Yeah, do you think?
Put him on the spot. That's right.
It is subtle.
That's very subtle. I got to give it to 37 just because of that half dividends.
Yes, exactly my thoughts.
It's not very often you'll be the president of a company with less than 50% of it. So that moving up and to the right just never really happens.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think about company ownership in these two games? And what I mean by that is the mixture of the companies good? Are there too many, too few? Are they interesting? The place to keep your poker chips, or are they tools? Do they really mean something? What do you think, Kyle?
Well, like you said, there's those mining companies, and the ones in 37 a lot more than the ones in 24 because of a few certain MacGuffins that 20 or 37 adds. One is that they only merge into a single 10% share. They don't control the beginnings of those major companies like in 24.
Right. In 24, that's the presidency.
Yeah. In 24, it's the presidency, and they control when that presidency comes out. 37 is just a minor 10% share. Doesn't matter who starts the company, you'll get a 10% share. You can use that company however you feel like using that mining company. You can stockpile money in it and then dump it all right at the end, buying this little crappy train that's going to rust immediately and take all that money out. Another thing is they don't have to own a train.
In 37.
Now,
in 37, mining and the miners
don't have to own a train. So you can sit down.
But in 24, everything's got to own a train.
Yeah.
So 37 sounds crazy to me, because usually if you don't have to own a train in a company, then how are you going to make people go bankrupt by forcing them to buy a train?
Well, the miners.
You'll never go bankrupt.
And the
those
miners.
Okay.
Right.
They're going to merge.
Have to own.
Okay, gotcha. But it's just there's a few little minor companies.
Yes.
The mining companies.
A few being 10.
A few. Holy crap. Well, so hold on. How do they do they need to own a train to make money, or do they just need to own it? Do they not need to own a train, period? And then they don't make any money? Or if they don't own a train, are they still like getting some sort of income?
They won't get any income if they don't own a train.
Okay.
They also have no share value.
Just want to make sure. That sounds so weird to me. It's like it's.
Yeah. No, they're cool. They're cool. Kyle, do you think these companies are tools in this game? I think they're tools.
I think they are tools, and they can be very blunt tools at times.
Yes, yes, indeed. You know what I think is one cool thing, and I think 1837 wins the company competition between these two games because there's more companies, so there's more tools, but also I think it's neat that in 1837 only two companies can ever open at the same price.
Yep,
that causes a little mini competition for the prime numbers.
So you can only set the par values of those companies.
Yeah.
Two of them can only be at the same price when you start them.
So you're limited as to what you can par a company by what other companies have been parred at throughout the game.
Right. Yes.
Because usually, like if we're going to compare this to 1830, there's like only people say that you either par companies in 1830 at the lowest, which I believe is 67, or the highest, which is like 100, right? So you have 67 companies and 100 companies. There's no reason to par anything in the middle. Does that sound accurate to you guys?
Pretty much. You can par at 90. But you're going to be hurting. But
So
but normally, you par at 67 and 100.
And in these two games, player outcomes hinge on these companies getting started and who controls them, especially the resulting companies of these mergers. One definite area of contrast between these two games, and Joe, you kind of alluded to this, is the train pressure. In 1824, there's a lot more pressure, as we were just talking about, right? Everything requires a train. You got to buy trains. In 1837, some companies don't have to have trains. Some companies do. In 1824, a little more normal. In 1837, the train deck it's crazy. There's so many trains and so many different variations of trains. Or trains get exported by the game. So the game is driving the pressure on the players to keep up with technology. It's much more intense experience of train pressure.
Mm-hmm. And that's, you'd say in 1824 it's much more intense, or in 1837 it's more intense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
24. Here's what the common vernacular is train rush. 1824 has got a train rush. 1837 has a on the beat line in the other hand. It's long, it's enjoyable, but it's not pressure really. 1824, there's pressure.
Okay, so in both games, is there this like really complex deck of trains? Because usually I'm not used to these trains being very varied. The most I've ever seen in an 18xx game is usually I've only seen that you just buy whatever train's available, and there's only one train that's being sold right now until the very end of the game, at which case you're allowed like two options between like the permanent diesel and then the 6 trains that are 5 or 6 trains that are available. Anyway, here it sounds like each train that comes out is almost like walking into the hobby store and being like, what train am I going to put on top of the set today?
Well, it is kind of that way in 1837, because there's like a 4 train and there's a 4+1, and it's kind of crazy, but it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So both of them have 2 main types of trains. They have the regular trains like in 1830 that just run between 2 revenue centers or 3 based on the number that are on them. The other one is the good trains, like we said before, which run out of a mountain spot and then run to cities and towns that they can. So they have to start in one of the mountain revenue spots. Otherwise, they can't run. But 37 throws in 2 more types of trains. One is an N+M train, like Tony was saying, was a 4+1. Now these trains can hit the 4 ends, and then that's just like the regular 4 train. But then it can also add in 1M, which stands for another town.
Okay.
Which is usually a 10 spot.
Like a dot.
But it can be anywhere in its route.
Yeah.
So they're more
so if there's
efficient.
A little dot in the middle of its route, it can count that as that 1, and then it can hit 4 other cities. So these are usually really powerful trains. And then on top of that, it adds express trains. Now these completely skip the towns. They don't count them at all.
Oh.
And they don't count against the number. So
you can just connect all your highest income centers together.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And those are usually the more fought over trains in the system.
When did they come out, though, specifically? Because usually in an 18xx game, there's the 2 deck of trains, and there's quite a few 2s usually because every company needs a train to start the game. And then you got some 3s, maybe a few less 3s, and then you got your 4s. But as soon as the first 4 is purchased, all the 2s go away, and you're left with only 3s. Then whenever the 5s are purchased, all the 3s go away, and there tends to be very few 5s because very, very few 5s because those are like the cheaper ones, kind of the desired ones for people who don't want to have to do a train buy from personal cash. And then after that, you see these 6s, which sometimes they'll do a 6. Sometimes the 6 is a straight diesel, but I've also seen like to where you've got a choice between buying a 6, which is more of a limited train but cheaper, or a full diesel, which is just like cost you a buttload of money, and usually it's more money than your company could possibly have unless it's been part at 100 and totally purchased.
Right. So that's the way 24 is pretty much, except for the goods trains.
Okay.
37 starts with the 2s and then goes to the 3s and the 4s. And the 4s wipe out the 2s like normal. But then at the end of the 4s, it has a 4+1. And then it has a 4+2. Just a single train.
End of the
then it has like a couple 4Es.
Right.
And then it goes to the 5s. Then there's like a 5+1 at the end of the 5s.
It's weird.
So getting that 5+1 and that 5E, like it almost seems like it intensifies that train rush because like not only do you have this good train, it either intensifies it, and I'm just thinking now, sometimes you'll end up with a train with kind of like a dead train that's sitting there because, as soon as somebody purchases it, that everybody else is going to start purchasing the next one to the point where that one's just going to rust immediately before it even gets used sometimes. Like a dead 4 is what I've heard them called before. Like, because like the last 4 sitting there is just pointless to buy. It's just a waste of money.
The poison.
There's
train.
enough trains in 37 that's probably not going to happen. But they do go out because those 4+1s and the plus trains are so useful in this game because there's so many cities on the map.
Well, so I'm just going to make a blanket statement here, trying to connect all the dots that we've heard about 1837, 1824. It sounds almost like 1837 came 11 years earlier, and it was like this totally ambitious and in some ways like stretched. It almost seemed like different for the sake of being different, because you're telling me like there's this hexagonal stock market, and it it rarely matters because you almost never don't own full ownership to get that like that diagonal movement. But then in 1824 they took that away, and it's like you're telling me that 1824 sounds to me like it has less MacGuffin. So it's almost like 1837 was like, here's all these ideas, and then let's spend the next 11 years playing this game and seeing how they work. Let's bring in Helmut, and then let's make 1824 sort of just like distill all those little things that were different about 1837, but then maybe cut a lot of the things that didn't add as much as maybe the two designers together thought they were worth. I don't know if that's at all true, but I think I've at least given you something to ponder over and shoot down at least eloquently, Tony and Kyle.
Yeah, I don't know if I can shoot that down. I think 1824 is a great way to play 1837, right? And because of the train pressure, and it's a shorter time, it has its own appeals. But I also think 1837 has its own appeals. And where else would these designers try out the printing games? Like 1837 was self-published back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so ideas and see how they work out. You make a game, you do the play testing. I mean, everything's like every other game. You have something, you put something out there, and it's natural for things to develop and go different directions. I think. Yeah, I think you're spot on a lot of what you said.
Wow. Yeah. Anything else, Kyle?
No, it sounds about right. I think.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting here, though, is Tony, that it sounds to me like in many ways, in many situations, you would still choose 1837.
You're absolutely right. I think 1837 is Lonny Orgler's magnum opus. I mean, it's big, it's important. I'm kind of an omni gamer in 18xx too. I like games that are mean. I like games that are friendly. I just like them all. I don't think I've met one I haven't liked yet. So let's say that. And me a lot of the same flavor, but with different concerns and different tools to wield. And I would play 1837 over 1824. But if we only have a school night to play a game on, I'd happily and eagerly play 1824. I really love and enjoy both of them.
What would you add to that, Kyle?
Well, I guess knowing if you knew where I started with 1835, which is a little different than a lot of people. So that's more in line with the 37. 37 is like almost a direct descendant from 35, and so it like hits everything I want in a 18xx game. It's has those mergers, and so in 24 it's like it's a smaller map, so you're right on top of each other, and so there's these extreme cash injections into the companies, which we didn't really get into, but in 1824 it's like a knife fight inside of a coffin at times.
Where you're all dead anyway.
Only one person will get out and be stuck with multiple blades. 24 is a tight, parsed down version of 37 that can be played extremely fast by quick players. if 37 is Lonnie's magnum opus, then I think 24 is a classic concerto and one of his best.
Okay.
The train rush is the soloist, with the rest of the train filling in as the orchestra around it.
That is eloquent. Yes, I used the word eloquent. I didn't realize we would end up with concertos and pianos and man, like.
Yeah. I hang with Kyle. He cool.
37, he captured the flavor of 35 and expanded on it and made a wonderful new experience that I would happily play every weekend. And it's never going to leave my collection. I have the original that's printed in German, and it's even printed in color. Thinking of when that was printed, I don't know how much that would have cost. Think about it. It's like the printing is like caked on. So, anything else you want to add, Tony? Or...
No, that's great, man.
That was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Well, I need more bourbon.
I'm stunned. I'm in silence.
Box of Kleenexes. So, what if you could choose and single out any one aspect here in 1837 and 1824? What sort of like single feature of the game, if you were going to try to sell it to an 18xx aficionado, what part is, and I know here I'm asking you to take this beautiful like mixed together, you know, the melange, and I'm asking you to just pick out all the zucchinis or something like that. But you tell me, what is the single little part in 1824 and 1837 that you think you have to come here to get this in the 18xx genre?
Kyle, you want to go first?
I think 37 is accentuated by its multitude of train types. It's defining it's one of its defining features, mixed with the multitudes of companies that can be run. 24 is based all around that exporting of trains. And it just pushes you and pushes you. And normally, where you normally are on, a lot of people say playing an 18xx game is like you want to be on the knife edge. You know, if you're too far off on the left or the right, you're either way too safe or you're falling off. It just depends on how far off of that ledge you can hang on before somebody pushes you off. Now, 24 will push you off itself. The players don't have to do it. The game will do it itself.
Who's going to rust my trains? The game will. It's like not
yes,
like
it will.
It's not you're starting up a new company just to rust all my trains, because that happens quite a bit in 18xx games where you'll see players, you know, identify that they're not in the best board position and look for ways to damage the dominant player. And a lot of times that's open up a new company, new influx of cash, new slots for trains, rust those trains that are giving them the other player the game. And here, you're telling me that the game is going to be doing that. That game is I wonder to what degree you could almost compare that to sort of like the Power Grid, the way that in Power Grid you have to do things kind of like backwards. It almost makes it so that that person who's in first place, you know, and some people say that Power Grid is characterized by that. But to what degree do you think is the consistent pacing of this train deck and the way that it diminishes and rusts trains automatically, is that in any way going to make players feel like if they're in a dominant position, like they're not able to get comfortable?
Well, one of the nice things that 24 did is another MacGuffin that they allowed. They allowed you to trade in a 2 train for a reduced price on a 3.
Huh. That's because usually if you go 2 trains, you're all 2 trains. because
even if you're tight, you can trade it in. Yeah. So you're never out of the game really, but you're just pushing that train rush even faster by doing that, because now you're taking a 3 for less money, or from a 3, So
yeah. Between that and exporting, that helps with the poison train situation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it sounds to me like the game is never going to slow down or lock up here. Like when you say this game lasts 4 hours, like unless you've got slow play, that like it's gonna end. It's not gonna have some sort of like spinning and treading water. It's like it's almost like a maelstrom, right? It's spinning the bowl.
It's got to hold on.
Yes, circling the drain. So I really appreciate that, guys. I think that the specific little element that you've singled out here in terms of the train deck and just how robust and unique that train deck is in 37, and then how it even it's like the same element in 1824, but instead to sort of appeal to, like you said, Tony, a school night, you've got like almost like the game has just this constant autopilot that's going to keep on sapping up those trains, and you've got to be able to work with, you'll never be able to be comfortable where you're at because the game is going to force it into the future rounds. So, and it sounds like there's a little bit of at least a little bit of a branch, a little limb, a little bit of a lifesaver in some of the rules, just because of how maybe totally like you could maybe end up in a literal spot where all players have no trains. Where like they had just all, but you've got, it sounds like there's a little bit of just some areas that the game is at least softened a bit because of how unique that feature is. So,
right.
You guys, I think, mentioned, like, we've talked a lot about 1830, and the game we haven't mentioned that's almost like bears it to me, it's become more and more relevant as this discussion's gone on, is that 1830 has a sort of little descendant game in the form of 1889. And in many ways, 1889 has like no MacGuffins, almost no differences from 1830, aside from it's just much more compacted. So the map is different, the companies are different, but for the most part, there's no other sort of like MacGuffins to wrap your head around. It's just that the game plays in about half the time of 1830. And from what I understand, that makes you guys really enjoy 1889 better. And I'm not sure if I'm oversimplifying your preferences there, but to what degree is 1889 is to 1830 as 1824 is to 1837?
Oh, that's great, man.
Go ahead, Tony. I've actually never played 89.
Oh, yeah. No, 89 is one of the 3 games I've been bankrupted in, actually. I love it. Yeah, HeavyCon 2 years ago.
You remember the name of the guy who did it to you? I'm sure you do, man. Got his picture on a dartboard in your room right there, like in an angle the camera can't see.
Probably.
So my face is up there too, then?
It's probably Andrew Brown.
Because I bankrupted you
in Ireland. That's right. In Ireland.
Ooh, that's a new one, right?
Allegory there, Joe, where like 1889 is to 1830 what 1824 is to 1837, but 1889 is more straight 1830, albeit smaller than the other 2 games, because the other 2 games, 1824 is smaller than 1837, but it's quite different in flavor and character. So I think that's a pretty good allegory, like I said, but there are some key differences there.
Yeah.
1889 is a terrific game and readily available and a wonderful starter game too.
By readily available, you mean that the print and play is like up there, right? Or do you mean, or is it getting picked up by?
2 things on that print and play. First of all, it's kind of art obfuscating the features, and also it's available from a publisher, and so that print and play is, I don't know, maybe that's not the best way to go because you can actually buy the game from a legitimate publisher.
Okay. Is it available from
I don't know what his standing is. Yeah, all aboard games. You can buy it from all aboard games. It's cheap. It's under $100, you know.
What's the wait time on that?
Like 1 week, 2 weeks.
Oh. Are they caught up? Is all aboard games like?
I think you're mixing that up with Deep Thought Games.
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah, because all aboard games and Golden Spike Games produce the full Deep Thought catalog, and you can have it right away.
Wow! I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've only played on the print and played version that you're talking about, which is interesting because you'd mentioned that like the art obfuscating. So essentially, what this one did is it tried to sort of flower it up. You know, it tried to make it look prettier on the map, and that's something that you don't like.
It's where's the green tiles? They're kind of brown or something. I don't know. I think it was made at a time when 1889 maybe wasn't fully available, but now that it is, I would definitely recommend buying it from all aboard.
Sure. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to say anything about that comparison, but yeah, 1889 is readily available. You can get it right now. Cool. Good to hear. I did not, from what I understood, it was impossible to get a hold of, and I'm glad that you've cleared that up. Fix that for me.
No, a lot of these games are not impossible to get.
Okay. And that's thanks to all aboard games, and also you mentioned Golden Spike.
Golden Spike, yeah. They're a little bit pricey because they're made one at a time. They're not made 5,000 at a time or 10,000 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but they're definitely worth it. You're getting a lot of game in those boxes.
So I just thought of a new comparison here, and I guess evaluate this then. So since you guys do agree somewhat that 1889 and 1824 sort of have the similar quality of being almost. And this is a really pejorative term, so you just I want you guys to both pucker up here. Get ready. Streamlined.
Okay. Oh.
The nails on the chalkboard. Are they the streamlined game? So I think that what we were saying earlier is kind of like because 1830 is such just a race to not fall off, that it works that 1889 is the same, gives you the same thing in a much shorter time frame. But here in 1837 and 1824, there was legitimate things in 1837 that bred its length, the flavor and the diversity of the companies, the sheer volume of the companies, the different areas of the game. And here in 1824, it sounds like that's been pared down quite a bit, or at least other aspects have. So it's not really the streamlined version. It's not the exact same thing because what 1837 had going for it simply couldn't be streamlined. It had to be it had to have sort of elements taken from it and then distilled. I don't know if you want to say distilled, but almost like stuck into almost sort of a blender. Like you take that train deck, blend it up a little bit, and then you just take the stuff that rises to the top, and then you've got what happens in 1824, maybe.
I think it's Honey, You Shrunk 1837. I think it's a reimagining, right, with different requirements. Like, how can we play this in 4 hours?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that almost just the design team, because this is a design team that's designed 18xx games, but has also been recently popular for like Euro games too. So I mean, like that to me, like that sort of just an influence of like how to get this into this clean small box. And I know that's not what 18xx players are always looking for. So that's I think why you, Tony, would prefer in 1837. Also, like you've mentioned here, school night games in essence are good to come by. But if every game is a school night game, then you wouldn't get the full experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. We're always looking for good school night games. We're always looking for good full day experiences.
All right. Well, this has been a really interesting and eye-opening experience here with learning, just because we've talked. I think this is great to in the place that it sits in the Longview's catalog of 18xx episodes, because we really we're talking here with almost like. I don't know if the Longview will ever do 1830 is basically what I'm saying, because I feel like what we've done here is kind of like talked about why this game replaces 1830 for you guys. And I think you've kind of gone into each of the different aspects of what draws you specifically to this game and how it's a richer experience for you. But you've also talked about, like what people might be looking for something different in their experience. And so I think we've talked quite a bit about what you might find in 1830. So 1830, just for the record, though, I don't think we said this yet, but 1830 actually kills kittens and puppies.
Oh, I don't know.
And there will be no peace in the Middle East until there is no 1830. So I just am really want to say 1830 is bad, right? 1830 is Krampus.
No.
Krampus to your Santa Claus.
Krampus.
No, but in all honesty, there's a lot of things that all the games we talked about here can offer. Is there any closing thoughts you guys would like to leave us with here in this analysis, this deep cut of 18xx, specifically these two, as you said, magnum opus and concerto in a 4-hour.
Yes. I do have one thought that you just actually put in my head. Because just like with Euro games, you can find games for all tastes. And with the 18xx genre, because of the different MacGuffins and the different lengths and the different things like that, you can find an 18xx game for all 18xx tastes. More than one even. It's a very rich, diverse landscape of games.
Thank you. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Kyle?
Yeah. Even in the Austrian-Hungary titles, there's a third title, 1854, that they did, which adds in Chrome, and it's like 6 hours long. And so,
as in Chrome, like the resource, or Chrome as in like it makes really
nice
pieces?
As in MacGuffins.
Okay, all right. I was just because we're mining here. I don't know. Are we mining Chrome now?
This adds like
that's what those good strains are carrying.
And locals. So
yeah.
Even in these titles, there's another one. If these two don't fit your fancy, the 24, I think, is like the best parts of 37 and 30 mixed together, and made a wonderful game. And 37, like I said before, is one of the best games by itself in that engineering line of terrain route building.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Really, you've capitulated why when I said, hey, tell me what your favorite 18xx games are, Tony jumped on with a list. This was the top one at the list, which shows you this is, but I'm sure that you did them like chronologically or in order of the order that you played them. I know,
probably randomly.
Tony has just been like squirming ever since I said that this was at the top of his list.
Yeah. I don't have a favorite. If you recall from my heavy cardboard days, I hated making top 10 lists. Edward would make me do it. We did a top 50, and I would do the top 40 in alphabetical order. Yep. And I would only consent to doing the top 10, and even at protest. So, I mean, I don't have favorites.
I seem to recall your top 40 was in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
Correct. How do you decide? I mean, I don't understand people rating games 8.2 and 8.4. What?
Yeah, I can totally get that. I mean, like you're getting in the mood for certain things, and a lot of times I find that my ratings, the more that I try to keep my ratings current, my ratings will sort of like change, and some of them go down, and I feel like that's not the game's fault. That's just that I've played it now 30 times, and I don't feel like going back to it. So I totally get where you're coming from, Tony. A lot of it just feels arbitrary. So in 18xx style here, what type of an ending should we have here? Should we have a bankruptcy where we just all slam our computers and just say goodbye, or should we end with 2 operating rounds of us adding up a whole bunch of stuff, and then
we're gonna do that on a spreadsheet, baby?
Yeah, exactly. There you go, man. I'm looking forward to when my guys in this local group get their spreadsheet done, and all I've got to do is just be the guy behind the desk and not that guy and his secretary. But I totally get it, though. And I know a lot of people specifically the first guys that did an 18xx episode were Eric Brocious and Joe Huber, and they can play 1846 in like less than 2 hours with their spreadsheet system.
Yeah. Crazy.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, there are definitely ways that you can make these games more accessible. If you're in the excited group of 18xxers that I know we're going to listen to this episode, I hope that we have given you. I hope that I have at least been able to be somewhat. I'm not sure what I am on this. Am I a conductor? Because if that's the case, then I guess you guys are the engineers. Or, but I hope I've at least been able to let you guys tell the audience that I know is going to love hearing about 18xx games, and specifically these ones, because these ones, I mean, like when you look at the only 18xx game that has that really high rating on Board Game Geek is 1830, and it's just so, for people that play 18xx games constantly, it is almost unanimously one that people have reservations about recommending. And I find that, like, an episode like this is going to be useful, I think, to people who are interested in getting in, because we've talked about, school night ones. But also we're going to be giving, people who, like you said, 1837 is readily available, but how many 18xx players out there do you think have actually given this one a shot?
Quite a lot.
Quite a lot. Okay.
Yeah, but they both have had limited releases.
Mm-hmm.
So not everybody has played them. And that's one of the reasons why they aren't way up in the VGG listing, like you guys had said on your other podcast. If not enough people have rated it, it'll be low no matter what the people have rated it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, when you get a limited release.
First,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these would be a great one. If you've not checked it out yet, get this. If you have played it, here's just a call to you, coming from me, and as well as just these two guys that have given me so many reasons to think this game is a masterpiece in its own right. If you've played this and you're listening to this and you've not rated on BGG, go do one of those like 10 ratings, right? Like BGG is just so full of 10s and 1s of like reactionary ratings. And I'm saying that totally facetiously, because I think it would even hurt Tony, just the fact that you rated this game at all.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah. So that's anyway, guys. Is there anything here that any loose ends for us to go to tie up here before? Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank you guys one last time here. Thank you so much to Tony and to Kyle here for joining us on this episode about 1824, 1837, which, if you go chronologically, should be in the other order, 37 and then 24. And many other 18xx games were talked about as a part of this. But thank you guys so much for coming on, sharing your expertise, sharing your passion. It's been great having you.
Joe, TC, thanks. Kyle, love you, buddy.
Yep. Thanks, Joe and TC. Love you
and
oh yeah, man! Thanks, both of you, for coming on. It's great to talk to you again, Tony. I'm missing you. I'm glad you're on Iron Gauge or whatever it is. I didn't realize you're on a podcast.
Iron Gauge. I think he just added. TC loves like Arkham Horror and dungeons and stuff. I think he just
War Gauge, Deep Gauge, Hard Gauge. I don't know. Well, I didn't realize you were on a podcast again, so I'm going to definitely add that to the queue. That's awesome. I'm glad you're still doing that.
It's Kyle's show. I'm just pitching in.
It's a great show. I meant Kyle when I said all that. Kyle, it's great to know you got a podcast out there.
Thanks, TC.
Yeah, you're welcome, man.
All right, well,
on, guys.
Thank you guys very much. Thanks also to host TC here. And I'd like to tell everybody here that doesn't know, TC is the guy behind the editing. So all the theatrics that you hear in these episodes, all the stuff that goes into it, he's putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on the outside. So thanks a lot to you, TC, for that as well.
And like I said, I wanted you guys to have the microphone on this one. You definitely have more 18xx experience than me. I do want to say for the record, we will be talking about 1830. I think that game has too big of a footprint in board gaming not to actually give it its own episode.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Mom.
Yes, we will be doing that. It's amazing. I was looking back at 18xx games and just seeing. I didn't realize that had an Avalon Hill print, and just to seeing it's. Wow, just following that.
It's like a different game, too.
Yeah, and that tends to be
what's preferred by many, from what I understand. But, yeah.
Well, I didn't even realize that to play some of the Winsome games, you had to have a copy of 1830 in order to play them.
Yeah, there's quite a bit here that I think a lot of individuals don't know that have interest in these, but like you said, limited print runs and stuff. But anyway, we're doing our part here in the long view to make sure that that it's not for lack of a long view episode. So this has been an awesome time with you guys. We've done great justice to an amazing game, an amazing design from a really excellent design team, and thank you all for listening. And continue to check out episodes of the Long View here with me and TC filling in for the great Jeff Gamble. I am Joe Sallin, and I hope everybody has a wonderful week of gaming.